First Dance, written by Dragon Lindgar, read by Arashi. As the reluctant protege of Rhea, the Archbishop of Seiros, Byleth was required to go to political and social functions that were deemed beneath or out of the scope of Rhea's duties, or which were meant to assist Byleth in obtaining the connections required to maintain the dominance of the religion in Fodlan proper. Byleth personally had misgivings about her position, but even her father knew that the better option was to agree with Rhea in public and disagree in private. The reason she, Byleth, had been sent to Duke Goneril's masquerade ball was because Rhea wanted to express displeasure over the recent handling of things at the Fodlan-Almyran border. The teachings of Seiros were rather inflexible on some things, and the isolationist stance was one of those. Byleth's presence was a subtle way for the church to say that they were watching Duke Goneril for what could be considered halfway treasonous activity. Byleth personally didn't care. People were people, no matter where they lived. They just happened to believe in different things, or have different preferences. That didn't mean they should be shunned or were a threat. However, even in her elevated position, expressing such thoughts would likely get her a one-way ticket to the afterlife, an exorcism, or a medical procedure meant to correct whatever imbalances were in her system, with the understanding that at most she had a 50-50 chance of survival. Even with her mask, everyone in attendance knew who she was. After all, only the Archbishop and her protege were allowed to wear lilies, and Rhea had impressed upon her the absolute need for her to wear at least one in her hair at all times. She had almost claimed to be allergic. She found the scent overwhelming, but she knew that Rhea would call her on that bullshit, so she had simply nodded and unhappily complied. Her hair color also set her apart. It had been, in part, what had convinced Rhea to take her on. Light green was apparently a divine color. Thus, people either avoided her for fear of her reporting back their words to the Archbishop, or sought her to carry out her curry favor. Both were annoying. She couldn't do anything about either. So, she simply endured the mistrustful looks and the sycophantic praise, remaining stoic, non-committal, and as unapproachable as possible. Byleth had finally found a place out of the way enough that anyone who wanted to speak to her would have to really want to speak with her, and would allow her to see the potential querent and plenty of time to observe them as they approached. Byleth allowed herself a moment of weakness to rub her temples, her fingers brushing against the lilies in her hair, sending a small cascade of pollen onto her fingers. She grimaced and brushed them off her gloves as best she could, but ended up simply smearing the yellow-orange across the pristine white silk. She sighed softly and interlaced her hands to make sure the stains were covered. It wouldn't be becoming for the protege of Lady Rhea to be seen with smudged gloves. As Byleth was about to steel herself to re-enter the fray of society, a young man approached her. He was wearing a wyvern mask and clothing with an unfamiliar cut and pattern. In a room full of pastels, neutral earth tones, and cool colors, his bright yellow, green, gold, black, and red stood out starkly. His entire ensemble was extravagant, with clashing patterns, gold thread embroidery, and precious jewels liberally distributed across his garb and person. His choice of wyvern as his face mask also set him apart, partially because it was made of leather instead of cloth, and partly because wyvern were seen as too bestial to be appropriate as a masquerade mask. In spite of the more flowing nature of his clothing, it was clear he was male, his skin a warm tan, his smile as he approached her effortlessly charming. He gave her a wide, sweeping bow before extending his hand to her. "Do I have the pleasure of making the acquaintance of Saintess Byleth?" the man said, his voice pleasant, musical, and mostly unaccented. There was a slight lift to it that Byleth couldn't quite place. "You do," Byleth agreed, and placed her hand in the unknown man's. "Might I know your name?" The man pressed his lips gently to the back of her hand, but kept a hold of it even as he pulled away. "I'm not sure I should tell you." "It would be impolite not to." "Only if you promise not to order me to be jailed," he said, and gave her an impudent wink. "Which means you are the reason I am here today," Byleth thought, keeping her expression serene. "So, it seems like the Gonerils have begun to have more extensive contact with Almyra. Interesting." "What makes you think I will throw you in the gaol?" Byleth asked mildly. "A little birdie might have mentioned that you're here to act as a spy for the church." and that said church does not appreciate outside interference. Your little birdie isn't wrong, Byleth said, and tugged her hand free, crossing her arms under her chest. If you are under the impression you are poking a hornet's nest by approaching me, you're wrong. It's more like lying a fresh deer carcass in front of a wyvern's lair. The man's smile only grew. Deer are sacred animals here in the Alliance lands, are they not? So it would only be a fitting sacrifice to the divine of the divine. The Church of Seiros does not require sacrifices, Byleth said coolly. State your business. The man's easy smile faltered a bit as he straightened the sash that ran over his shoulder, which was clearly a nervous habit. I simply wish to get to know you. I am Duke von Regan's grandson, Claude. Byleth's eyes raised slightly beneath her mask. Duke Regan does not have a grandson. Well, he didn't know he did until my mother got in touch with him upon finally informing me of my heritage, and at my request, Claude said. We had a cleric of the church perform the bloodline test, and I'm a confirmed von Regan. Welcome home, then, Byleth said carefully. Home, huh, Claude said. I'm not sure it's home yet. You have Fodlanese blood, Byleth said. Blood of the 10 elites besides that. Fodlan is your home. There are no foreigners at the ball tonight. The man blinked a few times, then laughed. Right you are, Saintess. Claude offered his arm to Byleth. I've been away from home for many years, though. Perhaps you could catch me up on what I've missed in my absence. Why ask me? Aside from you being the most valuable political ally I could have upon my return to Fodlan, Claude asked. You do not look at my skin color and twitter behind your fan of peacock feathers bland and flimsy excuses as to why it would be improper to speak to me. Byleth smiled faintly. It is highly improper for the saintess of the church to speak to a noble of questionable breeding, but I have never put much stock in propriety, and you are more engaging than most other conversations, she said, and put her hand on Claude's offered arm. Do you dance? Not well, Claude admitted. I have need to, relearn quite a few Fodlanese things in my long absence. You cannot be any worse than I, Byleth said, and led Claude back towards the dance floor. It will also provide us cover to speak without people starting rumors. A shrewd decision, Claude said. I can see why you are saintess. There's plenty of reasons why I am so, Byleth said. I look forward to learning all of them. Please try to keep your flirting more circumspect, Byleth drawled. Claude laughed as the two separated so Claude could bow, Byleth returning it with a slightly wobbly curtsy. She was more used to bowing, but it was expected. Her hands found their way to the expected starting position, and they started a dance that she suspected would last far past the ball they were attending.